Well, today we welcome Carrie Sensenbrenner from Tompkins Middle School, and Carrie is a sixth grade science teacher. So welcome and thanks for joining us, Carrie.
Hi, thanks for having me. What I'm going to start with talking about is when we went virtual, we had 2 days warning. So we were able to at least practice one virtual lesson. And on that day, I made a whim and told my students we would only have work in Google Slides. Just as a commitment to have some continuous platform that I would not challenge them with new learning platforms. And it worked out really well. So that's what I'm going to share. My school primarily was asynchronous. So I had live office hours that if a student had struggle, they had the option of attending. But otherwise, we published our lessons and the students worked completely on their own. And we did that every other day. So any day that I released a lesson, I hosted a live office hour time. And then they came. Some were just there for the social aspect and some were there for some help. So we get a little bit of everything. But so I'm going to share what ended up working really well. So the whim that I promised my students that we were only going to work in Google Slides ended up, I had a great result of students turning in work because of the consistency of that platform. They knew what to expect every single time. And then I was able to challenge them in different ways and really keep the student engagement going, because if there are tools out there that are great for online learning, like a Google form, but when you take a Google form, you're by yourself. Like I can't see that, Sarah, you're taking the same Google form. But if you and I were in a shared slide document, I can see you working and I can comment to you. So through Google Slides, we're able to really add in those characteristics of staying in communication and collaboration with everybody. And that just worked out so well with my students that at the end, I will probably keep some of those tools looking forward to what possibly the landscape could have. I'm going to share I'm going to share a couple of documents, but the first one I'm going to share is the lesson I put out to my students. And I'll show you an example of a student product that they would turn in.
I like that you figured out a platform and you stuck with that one. What I've heard a lot from in the last month or so is tech fatigue, where students are looking at so many different types of things. It's just exhausting trying to figure out all these different types of technology and all the different things. And so having just one for them to do, this is what we're going to stick with, this is what we're going to do, I think is an awesome thing.
And then as we go, like looking ahead, once I reflect on what I think that this ends up turning into a long reflective, almost like a yearbook of the year, or an interactive notebook that as they're building, because they added to one document. And every time they added it, it just got longer. And that allows them, if I were to test on new material in a virtual world, they just scroll up a couple of slides to see what material that we had just covered, versus, oh, now I have to go here and find that, and now I have to go here and go to this website. So I really like the organization for the student. Now I'll talk at the end about how it was very time consuming for me to grade, but some things that I realized that I can incorporate next year to make that easier. So can you see my slides?
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is just one lesson that I released to my students. And I always used this agenda slide in my room. So this was nothing different than what they had seen since August. I just removed one section that's right here under the picture because and I could have removed materials because it's the same every day. But I wanted to keep that consistency of every time they came in my classroom, they had an in-person agenda, what skills usually this is, our standards, and then what they were going to do alone. I work in groups a lot. So having a section of what you're expected to do alone was really important in my class, but pretty much now it's all on your own. I also color coded the slides over here to the black is something that was, and I'm giving them. So I'm giving them information to help their product, but the slides or the color coded in red, that was what they were expected to output to me. So they needed slide 5 and 6 to fill in, but slides 2, 3, and 4, they weren't going to require to type on them or anything. It was just background information. And that helped them kind of scan right away, say, okay, I've got 2 slides to do on this. Today's work is due, and they just had that. And then as they move forward through the slide document, every single class period had a different link. And so when they clicked on their link, it took them to every single person in their class's file folder. That was really important. Now the kids, when we set this up, they own their document. I own the folder. So I showed them an empty folder. They went, clicked new, and added it. We had a couple hiccups along the way of changing some settings because, like I said, we had one day to really prep, but there were some extra settings that we had to transition to. But there were some really good online tools that helped us when we had to change our commenting abilities. So this is a background video that gave them some insight of what the challenge was. And what we're doing in this case on this activity is it's a prototype for a twin turbine. And I'll explain how that fit into our whole big picture in just a moment. They had instructions on how to do their research. And then this you'll see is slide 5. So this is the slide they're expected to then copy over into their document, along with, here's another example, but they're to delete my picture and put their prototype picture in. So I did a generic prototype of some really cool pajamas for a giant, which is another activity that I'll talk about in just a second. So when they did this, this is just one day. Every single day that my students logged on, they saw with the date in order the new assignment. So, and this was also posted to Google Classroom, and then our principal had another area, all linking back to here. So to show you a student example, when we first started, slide number 1 is the very first virtual assignment. This would have typically been a mini lesson because it was setting them up for a background of their wind turbine. But with the requirements that we stuck below 30 minutes of virtual work, this ended up taking about a week, where it would have taken a day or two in class. They picked a choice board of a renewable energy source, and the student picked solar energy. They had to create a slide, and then this would have been a review. So in class, I do a lot of manipulatives, but in this setting, they just simply drag around to show me that they remember where these things went. So this is just kind of that formative assessment piece to let me know, okay, drag it, sort it. And then the next assignment came of what were some advantages and disadvantages. So they're getting some career options. This is just the background. Like I said, it would have been a mini lesson leading up to the engineering standard is where we were going with the design of the turbine. So they went from their choice of picking one renewable to then a choice of a non-renewable. And this is where the collaborative piece came in. Each student at this point knew one renewable and one non-renewable. So in a typical classroom, we would do what's called a jigsaw, and they would find somebody else to learn, and you could do a gallery walk and learn from a peer. So in the virtual world, since they had access to everyone's slide, we did a virtual jigsaw. So they had to list whose slide presentation they went into, and then they had to document what they learned from that person's energy that was different than their own. So that allowed them, again, that reminder that you're in a class with peers. I mean, that social aspect was really important because then they could also see an example like, oh man, my slide presentation is not really good. I don't have any pictures, or that person's is amazing. You know, they really got to reflect on the status of work too, and seeing an example was really important. And they did then the same for non-renewable. So at this point, we were able to get into each other's documents, but we had a hard time moving forward because I needed them to comment on each other's papers, which at the time I didn't realize is a whole different shareable setting, and neither did they. We an online program called IORAD.com, which allows you to record your screen clicks. So it's up here. I'm not going to click on it because once I click on it, it makes me do it, and it's hard to get out of in a screen share format. But if you can see in the upper right-hand corner, it's this little pink box. In IORAD, you can edit it at the end, but when I start clicking, it records my screen clicks and gives them little blurbs of instructions, but I can also change. Like if I wanted to use my classroom lingo of, if I always say, click this box, I'm like, click the chat box. Well, that's not really called a chat box. So if I wanted to change to use my lingo of what I've always referred to it as, I can edit those instructions. And so through that quick tutorial, all of my students seamlessly were able to change their comment features to be able to comment because next we transitioned to a real world problem in our community. Over the past couple of years, we've looked at should our local Evansville community have a wind farm, and also a solar farm is what's currently in the news. So they had to explore real news documents in the newspaper as well as clips from the local news channel and create a claim evidence reasoning document. And so that's just a normal structure we use in class, like state your claim, give some evidence, what's your reasoning? And so this was draft one. There are some problems in this draft. So they had to actually suggest, and I grabbed a screen share here before they resolved. My kids resolved like crazy, so they kept disappearing, but I wanted to start getting some insight of what they were telling one another. So I would try to just screen grab some of their comments. And once their comments features turned on, they were really giving some good feedback to one another. And that was a transition through the year, because at the beginning of the year, they would just say, hey, Stephen, you're great. Hey, Sarah, that's great. And I would go back and be like, that's not really that great. Like, that's not the feedback we want to get. So when they did this, you can see the student says, hey, you could have a better conclusion. That's a good recommendation, or what's the example? And then they took that feedback and they had to write a final draft. So you can see it's changed. We don't use I as in our scientific language. They made sure to update that. And so then we went on to the Earth Day slides. So every one of these came from a different day of assignment. So they can look back and see exactly what they accomplished in the virtual setting since March, and were able to add their research. We did a design. So now we're really at the purpose of our fourth quarter, which is the prototype and engineering standards. So going through the big picture of learning about the non-renewable and renewable, and then bringing it to a local issue, we wanted to make sure our purpose was, if we're going to have a wind farm, it needs to be helpful for bird collisions, because that was just our class concern was the birds. So we wanted to make a design. We know that there's existing designs, but part of the standard is critiquing an existing design and modifying it. So they had to make an initial sketch and then eventually analyze their design, analyze other people's designs, again, going back into each other's slides, and then make it and reflect on it. Like, does it really work? What could you do? Well, at home, they had to use whatever was at home. In class, we would have had specific, I would have made sure they worked. This young lady's blades did not turn, but some students really were creative and made blades that turn. So I'll zoom into her picture. So she just used a paper towel roll with some paper twisted around it, but through her background research and through her sketch, like, she did exactly what she sketched, but I can see she got the understanding of what her idea was from her background research. So she met the standard. In person, would we have done a little bit different here? And then we ended the year with, what procedures should I adopt for next year? Just asking them for help to see what students thought of looking forward of, what the situation in the classroom and what am I going to need to change. They really wanted to keep flexible seating in my classroom, and they're worried that that would go away for the new students coming in because of COVID. So they were trying to help me with that. But that was how we managed our asynchronous learning throughout the year. Now, some reflecting on this of what worked and what didn't work, or what I would do a little bit different. The hard part, I'm going to direct your attention here to student 2. If I were to do this again in the future, and I think it has a valid place, I think you could use it in a couple of different ways. Even if, say, things are perfect and we stay in class all year, I think you could use this format of just an interactive notebook and teach students how to link to other slides within the presentation. Because that was, again, a challenge for me as I was grading. That took an extra amount of time, was I had to find where they put the slide. Hopefully it would be at the end, but when students weren't following, the proper turn-in time, like, it's due in 2 days. Well, they're doing an assignment from 4 days ago. I have to scroll through all of the slides to find it. So something I thought that I would teach them would be to link directly to the assignment and just create a table of contents. Or if this was their interactive notebook, have a link to vocab. If this was AP Bio or AP Physics, then they could have a vocab section, a research section, and different chapters in this way, and then review for their AP exam. and have it all just right there. Another thing you'll notice is color coded. So from what I wanted to see, I wanted a tool as a visual person to look at your slide to say, okay, you have stopped working. And so in a thumbnail view, if every time you did an assignment, you added a color, and I said, the last assignment, make sure you color your box on your table of contents purple to let me know you've done it, then I could scroll through and be like, okay, they're telling me as a visual that's a completed. And then nothing else gets filled in. I know that student hasn't checked in their work again. And I could go back to student 2 and be like, hey, I've noticed you stopped working. Or I could click on it and double check and then make that phone call right away rather than scrolling through everybody. So I just was looking to see, like, how can I make this easier on me? I didn't have time to incorporate that extra instruction this year, but I would definitely do that next year.
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
I really, I really like the visuals that you have there, and then the linking to the different slides. I think that's awesome. And then, I know it. And then the other thing that was just fantastic was that you were having the students go and reference the other students' work, their peers that they were looking at. What an awesome way to get them thinking about, citing the source or giving credit to the people that were doing that. Those are all great.
It kept our interaction. I mean, it really, I think that just seeing each other, seeing them, and if somebody wasn't doing their work, then they became concerned. And then they had another classmate looking out for them, like, hey, I really wanted, they want to look at their friends. If you and I are buddies and I want to go into your work because you're my person that I always look for and you haven't done anything, then they have an accountability partner that might call them and say, like, hey, you didn't do science. And so that was helpful in some of my classes to say, well, they'll ask me too, like, I really wanted to do Sarah's. Well, I haven't gotten a hold of Sarah. Have you? And I'm like, I'll try. And that was helpful and kind of positively motivating students. So, I mean, I had a good experience in using this and doing it this way. Now, my very last assignment was a Google form. And I was just like, whew, that was easy. I mean, I'm glad I did it. That was my last one. It was to have the timestamp. I mean, I recognize that. To have that it's all in order and I can sort it over and over again just to do a double check to make sure that student was there. I think there's a place for it, but it made it really hard to do new material and felt like I was with the kids. Whereas I really felt like I knew what they were doing. And when they put pictures of themselves in, I would leave a comment saying, I'm so glad I saw your face. Like, thanks for doing that. It makes me happy. And I was able to leave them feedback as we went, which you would do in class, but in a virtual world, it would just be hard if it was always a Google form or this website.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like this idea. And I like the fact they have artifacts. Mm-hmm. They have their virtual notebook. That's awesome.
I think we'll start with some type of document. My hope is we start in person and more in plan, if we have that suspension of in-class time eventually, that we have some of these set up and carry it through. And if we go virtual, then we have something already created and some procedures.
No, that's outstanding. I love that. And I like the fact that they can comment on each other's.
Yeah.
So it's the things you put, it's like a view only for them, and then they just can click the links and stuff. And they put, view and comment on theirs.
View and comment. And they just go through. I made several videos about copying and pasting slides because that was not something that we had done very often in class. And there were still some students. My goal, like I said, most students, I'd say about 95% of students made one document. But I had a handful that would click make a copy of this assignment and send me an individual. But I could handle 5 kids for just a few weeks doing that. I tried initially to prompt them through, hey, can you move this? Can you move this? And when it wasn't working, I just said, we only have 2 assignments left. This wasn't the format, but I'm okay. And but like I said, I didn't want it also kept my inbox clean because I didn't want every single student emailing me their shared document every other day 120 times. I mean, it gets lost when you have all of those, like, so-and-so shared it, so-and-so shared it. I'm like, oh, goodness gracious. And then trying to manage the digital organization of that, like moving their files somewhere else. I mean, I just saw that as a nightmare for myself. Look, let's do it this way. And
Right.
5 kids did not follow the directions in that way, but they we went over. The biggest hiccup was it was copying and pasting, and so I always made videos. I think at the end there's a video of myself. If you need to see me doing it using Screencastify, that this is me just going through the instructions. And I'm always like 2 fingers, and they have Chromebooks, which made it really hard sometimes because I don't have a Chromebook. And the copying and pasting is a little bit different, like 2 fingers, click, and then trying to go through the instructions to them. But other than that, yeah, they couldn't comment on here. And every once in a while, I get a kid say, "Hey, requesting edit of mine." But this was asynchronous. Like I said, these are posted. I didn't do any live instruction. But I was asked to make some documents of what if we went to synchronous learning? Like, what would that look like? And as we talked briefly initially, that would be a big challenge for myself as a teacher because, I have a hotspot on my phone. So hours of synchronous learning would be difficult for me as a teacher, not just a student. I've got to minimize this really fast. Find my, to find what I went through. Okay, so here is an example of a synchronous lesson. My students, when we start the year, I picked one of their favorite activities. And I've pulled pieces, and this is with permission from a game creator called The Extraordinaires. And it is a design studio, and we use this. It's one of my favorite things. I think there's a lot of benefits to user design thinking. And we start the year with user design thinking as a brainstorm. We do rapid prototype bell ringers, and then I bring it in with our computer science unit, which is in 6th grade science. We do user design programming, and then again with the prototype for the turbine. So this activity would be a synchronous virtual using what they want, just like I said, a fun activity my students already have. So when we start a synchronous learning, just taking a deep breath and reminding like what mindset we want. We do mindfulness in class, so just trying to repeat that behavior in a synchronous environment, and what materials that they would need was a little bit different. But, whoops. Sorry. Take care. Okay. So going through a conversation, and you'll notice that these slides, let's try this again. I might just do it in this mode. That's weird. So my pictures have disappeared, but on this slide, so what you'll notice that's different with some of my slides here is I don't front load very often as a teacher, and that's I feel like sometimes the transition to virtual learning has changed. We're doing more of what we're told not to do in the classroom, which is front loading some of that because you don't get the information and you don't get that ability to have the group conversation. So I try to do as little as possible information slides, just the vocab, so that the conversation can try to develop in a virtual world. So in a synchronous environment, I would have the slide up and try to encourage more of the conversation to be happening. So this activity we're reflecting in this picture off to the side is different types of pencil sharpeners. And then me as a user, like what things are designed and what things do I use as a user of different items. Why would I need different pencil sharpeners? One on the go, one in the classroom, one at my house, one for crayons and colored pencils and all the things I have to ask to sharpen first. And then in this case, we're doing a design student challenge. And I have no idea why my pictures aren't working. I'm sorry. It must be my bandwidth of just making them.
Oh, but yeah.
So I'm going to try to see if I can. I'm going to switch you out real quick. Okay, let's try this way. Sorry, we're going to try one more thing. Where initially I tried to copy and paste some slides over from 2 different files. and merge them. There's their pictures are back. Okay, so this is, like I said, from the game, The Extraordinaires. The Extraordinaires have extraordinary characters. And this is where I think gives students a chance to really develop some empathy with somebody else. And it meets them on their level because they're not going to be able to right away in the year develop empathy with you know, Ada Lovelace or a scientist that's completely out of their realm, but they can do it to a werewolf, they can do it to a vampire. But the goal is that if we do this enough, when it comes down to social studies, if they're to write a piece about from the perspective of a Roman, then maybe they can really use those skills to think of like, what would that person want? What did they need? And that's what we're constantly going over. So they're going through our giant, looking for clues and using that same claim evidence reasoning that they'll have a second. So in my other slide document, I have timers and I'll give them 20 seconds in the synchronous environment to analyze this picture. And then they have to come up with a claim. So here that you saw in the asynchronous assignment for the prototype of the wind turbine, like what was the claim that they had to make? Should we have it or not? So here's what is this claim about this giant? So we're having those conversations in a live chat like this. And so these would transition. What did you notice? This is what I noticed. And then some of these claims are wrong. Like what was my evidence for liking archery? I didn't have any, so I have to cross that out. And so we kind of are fact checking one another, and they could use their annotation on their screen share. In this virtual environment, they could annotate and circle. Sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad. I would be like, hey, Sarah, would you please circle all of your pieces of evidence and where you found that, so that you don't have all of these circles happening at once on your screen, and then allowing those privileges as you go. So this would just be, then we stop and we design something. So we're going to have a challenge and we want to make a design for this user. But before we can do that, we have to think like them. And so now this is where I'll use the poll. Like, what would be the best pet for this person? So we have to really think like, what would a mermaid want as a pet? Could they have an elephant? And there's a couple under here. Like, what would the giant want for a pet? And so they then have to either do the poll or put it in the chat. So it's some, response driven that they wouldn't have otherwise, that you could do in a classroom of 4 corners. Like, go to this corner if you think they should have a dog. Trying to mimic some of those transitional activities. Same thing like a chair. This isn't our design, but we're trying to think like the person to build that empathy. And so then they got to pick somebody, and then they have to tell me like who they picked. And now once you have your person in mind, what if I gave you a bike? Like, would your person like it? So again, like just rapid activities to think like somebody else. That my goal in a synchronous environment is to be as engaging. Like, it's not a lecture. So if I can make sure, like you noticed on slide 15, slide 13, slide 12, they have to give me feedback right away before we move on. So I am not a sit and get teacher. So the challenge of a synchronous environment where I'm just lecturing is not what's going to be for me. So I want to make sure that they're engaged. And so I would use hand signals of like 1, 2, or 3, so I could see on the screen to make sure, like, does your person like this or not like this? About this, if your person was a vampire, are they going to be a cupcake eater? Like, probably their snack. And so just thinking about things that we would like, does a mermaid need a pair of rubber boots? And so rapid fire, constant interaction would make the synchronous environment go a little bit faster. So now it's their turn. So we're going to design, I picked a pair of pajamas for my giant, but if you did a pair of pajamas for your mermaid, then that would be your activity. And then they draw. And so they're to sketch it, and that's right back to the other slide. That's where the pair of pajamas on the other slide document came from, where I made, maybe it's cold for my giant, and it needs to have, but material's hard to come by, so I would have ruffles that extended really long, and then could also roll up if it got hot, and so that they could kind of sync that back together. I'm gonna look for that. I merged the documents together. It wasn't the best use. So here's my prototype. So then we go through like the level of prototyping. Like here is generic pajamas, but what is a zipper? Again, like critiquing an existing design. Would a zipper be good for a giant? Like how long would that have to be? Or how big would these buttons need to be? You know, really getting into the mindset and then asking those questions. And so, okay, here's my prototype, but that's so generic. Like if I'm going to make a giant a pair of pajamas, it better wow them and be an efficient use of material and skills. So this is the first prototype. Now I'm going to make an iteration, so adding more vocab, reminding them what iterations they're familiar with. Iteration is not I give them one wheel and then the car, it's that we're changing it over time. And so if we were to make this, here's my first one, and then here are my timers. Like you have to do it. I'm going to give you 20 seconds, and then you wait. I mean, you have to give the wait time, and that's what I think we forget about in a synchronous environment is filling the air with our own voice instead of reminding them that they're part of the class. So I made sure to put in wait timers so that they can think and know that I'm going to expect an answer. Again, here's another wait timer after I asked a question. I brainstormed my ideas, went through the different, like maybe it would be really cool if the fabric had a biomimicry factor in it. You know, maybe they don't want to be found. Maybe they're only friends to one community. So that was really trying to pull them to get as creative and imaginary as possible with their ideas. And then here is my design. So I showed them my example, and then we could go through and share their examples. So it would be, you know, like a live prototype synchronous environment where we would be making and then sharing and responding and interacting. So that was just one idea for a synchronous activity. But I think what I always came back to when I was planning is I want them to interact with me about every other slide. And I want to have some type of response and check in, and whether that's holding up fingers or showing something to get their input and not just wait to see it.
Carrie, what platform would you use as you were going through the synchronous lesson? How would you see your students with that?
We use WebEx, and we're required to use WebEx as our school corporation. Yeah. My students figured out that they could use Microsoft Teams on their own, so they would branch off and use Microsoft Teams for their collaborative stuff, and then come back. But that was blocked about 2 weeks ago, so they're not getting that feature back. So we were driven solely to WebEx. My personal children use Zoom.
My kids' teachers were using Zoom for most of their things.
Yeah, same with ours. It was Zoom. So
And I've learned some other cool things that I've not incorporated yet, but some tools that you can add in, like for the live, is another teacher of mine. She doesn't share her slides. She does not do this. She makes her students have the slides up on their own computer. And so that you're really getting the classroom environment. It works really well on the double screen, you know, what we were talking about earlier, but not all students have that. But if you made your slides interactive, it takes a little bit longer, is what I've learned, is you have to, so if I made this slide and then I asked you to post on it, like you could move around my text box. So I would have to do a upload. I'll do an upload real fast. I'll change the background. You would have to change the background to an image, and then these kids could add an emoji to it. You know, like if you wanted to do a cell check-in, like a social emotional check-in of, okay, so if you and I were to do this, let's do it this way. If you and I were on a group, like, and I wanted to know where is your hometown, then I could add a star, and the kids could add anything that they wanted, you know, add a shape. I'm going to do so that the kids could then say like, oh, I'm from down here. And that if you wanted to do this in a different format, but they can't change my background at all. So it takes a little bit longer to plan. But you can't do this in a shared screen way. The kids have to have it up on their computer. So then you could have, you know, if this is something else, you could have a million suns popping up everywhere as your whole class is answering a question. interactively at the same time. So I think that's a really cool thing that I've been thinking about adapting if we go to the synchronous. But the amount of time to save it as a background and then upload it so that you don't get kids deleting everything
Right.
would be an investment that I'm waiting to see like what the announcement is. That's just one tool that to tuck in your back pocket to think as an option.
That's an awesome point about, creating that as a background, and then the kids can manipulate things over that. So I like that.
Yeah, I like that as well. I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
And how is that to manipulate over that? How is that shared with them?
So you would have to make a bit.ly, and I would have, or a short. You could share the exact document, but I would probably just post in an announcement like, "Here's a bit.ly to our slides." It would be I would have to have a master copy because you have to have editing rights. Like in order to drop this, I would have to have an editing right. So it would have to be an open edit to anybody with link format. But if it's all set as your background, they really can't edit anything. So they can't go back and delete. My students would not recognize it as a background and try to be malicious and change the background. I don't think that their minds would go there. That would be, if you notice something doing it, I always tell my students, version history is my best friend, and it's also my vice principal in the room, making sure that you're on the right thing. And I didn't have any malicious activity when they were going into other people's. Like nobody commented on each other's work saying like, "You're horrible." They were really good, and so that was just, I think, in this environment, they want to be working together, and it hasn't been those type of problems weren't the behavioral management. That's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
There's always something, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, good. I like these. I like this, and I hadn't seen someone using Google Sheets as a platform, for them. And so this is really nice. I like this. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. I'm going to stop sharing now, but
say we appreciate this. This is something unique that we've not seen yet.
good.
Teachers will appreciate, and that'll definitely get people thinking of different ways that they could use, whether it be Google Sheets if they're Google School, or something else if they're different. If they're a Canvas, maybe they'll be doing something on there. But I like the way you've set that up. Very nice.
I love the mindfulness of all of it, and just the real, really trying to connect the students with each other, and you trying to connect with the students. You can tell there's just been a lot of effort put forth to make that happen. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Please hit that subscribe button so you'll continue to hear about new resources for the classroom.
If you have a resource to share or want us to find a resource about something in particular, tweet us at Purdue SOS or email us at k12science@purdue.edu.
Boiler up!
Hammer down.